Bob, for the warmth of your welcome, and it would be remiss of me, quite frankly, to attribute any performance on the radio after just a few hours sleep to caffeine. It is written not by might or by power, but by the spirit that these things are achieved, and I would like to attest to that. Nevertheless, I thank you for the warmth here. I'm very happy to be here. My wife considers she's half New Zealander because indeed her great people came here, built one of your first churches over at New Plymouth and one of the hospitals, and the oldest house in Auckland in Airedale Street. So we went to see that yesterday. They're knocking a bit of it down, and we got some lumps of rock to take home for the family. I just hope we can get past the customers. That's the other issue. Also, I thank you for your sharing your concern in this really very serious and very sad business, which is growing with exponential rate in the Western world. I don't know about New Zealand, but I'm sure it's a phenomenon here as well. And that is this issue of childhood gender dysphoria. It's a very sad business. And I would like to say right at the beginning that my heart goes out, not just to the children involved, but to their families. I have spoken with an increasing number of families, and this is a very painful business. It is a very serious medical business, because the way of the medical pathway, the escalator that children get on, leads to lifelong, major, massive intrusion into their body and their minds, which we will get to in a few minutes. So if I can work this is what we're going to do. It's a bit, Bob, you said, there you go. We're going to do this, but don't panic. We'll get there, and the time is already on. And there will be some things that we can't do in great detail, but they're in the Quadrant article. That's the issue. The first thing is, we've got to thank you New Zealanders for messing everyone up, because in your Youth 2012 survey, you asked 8,000 young people, do they ever feel that they're the opposite sex? And 1.2% said, yes, we do. About 2.7% said, no, well, we don't know, we're not sure about this. And about 5% of that said, we don't understand the question. But nevertheless, in Australia, 1.2 plus 2.7 is almost 4, and the Safe Schools program then took 4 as the attestation of the prevalence of cross-gender identification. This, of course, is nonsense. If, nevertheless, you took the 1%, then there is great news, because the Bible of psychiatry, the Diagnostic and Scientific Manual of Mental Health, says that 85 to 90% of these children will in fact reorientate to their natal sex through puberty. That's the good news, and I want to begin and end with good news. If you take your spurious 1%, and then you take the figure that is quoted throughout the world of the attendance for seeking for help in clinics of adults seeking help for cross-gender identity, it is 0.003 to 5%, which when you're extrapolating from 1% to 0.003 to 5% means that 99 to 97% of children are in fact going to grow out of this. That is indeed the good news. Of course, the claims are increasing that it is a phenomenon that hasn't been recognised in the past, and in the Melbourne Children's Hospital, Sydney Children's Hospital, and Brisbane and others, there's an increasing number of children being brought along for counselling. 250 to 350 a year in Melbourne. Same in Sydney. This is an extraordinary phenomenon. So in writing the first article in Quadrant, I rang up some 28 paediatricians that I knew. Urgent care paediatricians, not hiding away in subspecialties. 28, the cumulative experience of 931 years. They recalled 12 cases only. They were rejecting of the whole concept, but they said, don't mention me. 12 cases in 931 years. 10 of those cases, they recalled, were associated with severe mental comorbidities, which is severe depression, behavioural abnormalities, compulsive disorders, autism. 10. The other 2 had been victims of prolonged sexual abuse. Now, it used to be, when I was a younger paediatrician, that if some child came along and they attested, oh, I'm really a girl, or I want to be a girl, or whatever, that you thought, hang on a second, why is it that this person is finding that sex so difficult? And you wondered about sexual abuse. 12 cases in 931 years, which means one case almost every 100 years. Now there's 250 to 350 turning up. I'm grateful to the first speaker for a number of things, for bringing out this terrible business, but also for making me wonder about something. Hang on a second. I believe that this rise has been inspired, fanned by a sensationalist, uncritical media. I think that it is given direction by iniquitous websites, counselling services and other things. But when I reviewed the 56 cases that had come before the Australian Family Court, there's a new phenomenon. Most of them were girls, as opposed to the past. I wonder, this is my new thought of the day, I wonder how much the access to child pornography is causing this. Are the girls saying, well, we don't want to be girls with all this going on, we'd rather be boys? I'd never thought of that before, and I'm grateful for that thought. We mentioned the associations when I reviewed these cases. Half of them had, the law cases are not medical documents, and you have to read through it. In half of the cases, they made a point of emphasising the seriousness of the mental comorbidity. Some of these kids were not just depressed, they were so depressed they couldn't get out of bed. Now the people argue that, well, they're depressed because they've got gender dysphoria, but often the depression antedated and ran in parallel with it. And in any case, if you thought that, it was 150, 200 years ago that we gave up treating mental illness by surgical intervention, which is what I'm getting to. There is a serious association with breakdown of the families. At least half the children, when you could actually read what happened to the family, half of them came from broken families. So what happens? We'll repeat the good news one more time. The vast majority are going to get over it if you don't mess them up in the process. We went to Canada. My wife and I, we spoke with a fellow named Kenneth Zucker, who was in charge of the Gender Dysphoria Unit in Toronto for 43 years or so. His argument was the majority of these children are going to reorientate to their natal sex through puberty. Don't mess them up. He said, be kind, be gentle. You don't flog them, of course. You understand. If they really insist on wearing a dress, okay, fine, but then you would set certain limits to it. Well, we won't wear the dress to grandma. You know, my grandma doesn't understand dresses on boys, or we won't wear the dress to the mall. You know, you wear the dress around the house. But so you are using certain kind boundaries in the full optimism and expectation that the majority will grow out of it. But what happens to those who don't grow out of it? Zucker was by no means anti-homosexual. He said that of those who do not grow out of it, most of them then will have a homosexual orientation. And he argued, surely that is better than the medicalisation and the surgicalisation, which is no such word, that is involved in making them cross-sex. Surely. I mean, at least you're not castrating them, for starters. Now, for saying that, and for saying we're waiting and the watching, and be careful, he was sacked. And at the same time, laws were passed, which we'll get to, in Canada, which basically forbid medical practitioners to do anything but affirm the process of crossing to the opposite sex. That's a law in Ontario. Medical practitioners are not allowed to practice what's called conversion therapy or reparative therapy, which means that you are not allowed to give advice and to help the child wait and convert him back to his natal sex. It's a play on words, you've got to be careful. But that's illegal in Ontario. It's illegal in 3 states in the United States. It's pending legislature in about 12 others, and in the state of Victoria, which we can all be proud in Australia, under the new Health Complaints Bill, Hennessy, the Health Minister, basically alluded to the power to stop this heinous reparative conversion therapy. She didn't mention age, but later when she was quoted, it was getting around to the gender dysphoria. We'll end up on the laws because we need to be aware that a number of very, very serious laws are being passed in this process. Okay, so if the kid's going to grow out of it, why do you want to fuss? Well, that's the big issue. And that's the problem, because the first step of this medical pathway in which many children are now being entered, might I add, more often than not by a mother. I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. A mother who becomes so enmeshed, so enthusiastic, so committed, that she becomes a cheerleader for this process, driving the child to become the poster boy of the school, if not of the media, the social transitioning, the changing of the names, the wearing of the dresses, the changing of the pronouns. All of this is the first stage of the social transitioning of the medical pathway. So what happens next? The kid's been wearing a dress and so forth, and comes the time of puberty. Now, it is argued by these people that you should give the child longer to think by blocking puberty, as if any child in the prepubertal age can think seriously about procreative choices and so forth later on. You are postponing this by blocking with puberty. Now here we have to go sideways a little bit. You need to know this is the hypothalamus, and a hormone is produced from the hypothalamus which acts here on the pituitary gland. You got it? Because that's the one we're going to block. We're going to block this one here. It's produced here, acts on the pituitary gland. To do what? This. There's the hypothalamus. There's a hormone coming here to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland releases these 2 hormones that go all around your body, impact upon the gonads, and then they stimulate, or acts on the gonads to stimulate the gonads to produce testosterone and estrogen. You got it? Produced in the hypothalamus. This is the one that's going to be blocked. It causes the pituitary here to release hormones, goes to the testes and the ovaries, reproduce sex hormones that come around and give the changes we all know about. So very cleverly, they were able to make a chemical that would block this. So the child then remains, he doesn't grow or she doesn't grow and doesn't develop the sexual sex characteristics. Allegedly what you are doing is letting the child have more time to consider being a girl or a boy. 56 of the court cases, in 13 or 15 of them, it said, repeating a mantra which had been given to the judges by committed doctors, this is safe and entirely reversible. The effects of the blockers are safe and entirely reversible. Oh, sure. It slows up the child's growth, weakens their bones and stuff, but that's fixable, and indeed it is. But at the same time as this phenomenon was taking off, so what does it do? Let me just go back. The hormone comes here, acts on a receptor, comes down here, acts on genes, and then that causes the release of the hormones. We'll move on. This is a little complicated. We're going to simplify it. What I've said so far is that the hormones coming from the hypothalamus act on the pituitary to cause the secretion of sex hormones. Got it? But they found that the receptors for those hormones in fact existed throughout the brain, not just on the pituitary, evoking the concept that there were other effects that could be blocked. They got this fish, asked him about the ethics of it all, and would you mind very much if we had a little look inside? And then they stained, and this is merely to make the point that in these fish, the receptors, the coloured things here, are not just to do with the pituitary gland. They are to do with broader concepts. Now, at the very same time, our doctors in Australia, some, just a few, have been saying to the judges these effects are safe and entirely reversible. Workers in Glasgow and Oslo and other places were submitting sheep. So they were giving puberty blockers to the sheep. And then they asked them, do you mind if we have a little look inside? And what they found was a reproducible hypertrophy, in other words, increase in the limbic system, which we'll get to in a minute. An increase in the limbic system in which over 100 genes were upregulated and 200 were downregulated. So what's the limbic system? Here it is. Okay, so it is near the hypothalamus. It is deep in the brain. What does it do? It coordinates emotion and behavior and judgment and thinking and executive function. It's a big coordinator of what's going on. Hang on a second. In sheep, it gets bigger. 100 genes are upregulated, 200 genes are downregulated. Are these sheep going to behave normally? Well, no, they've got special ways over there of talking to the sheep and saying, this is a maze, we want you just to walk through this maze. And they found that those who had their puberty blocked couldn't work out the maze. And also were emotionally skittish. I had no idea how you work out whether a sheep is emotionally upset. You New Zealanders might know better than me. But apparently they're skittish, they're nervous, they go to the toilet more frequently, they bar and all that sort of stuff, and they're not attracted to coming down, they're confused. Do you see what's happening here? And those sheep never got over it. What we are saying is that while our doctors were convincing our judges that this was safe and entirely reversible, that's not true. Major work being done throughout the world was showing that is not true and that it is a lasting impact on the way the limbic system works. Now, you've got this child who's 9 years old, you start to block his puberty as if he's going to think more clearly, and at the same time you mess with his limbic system. How can he possibly work out whether he wants to be a man or a woman? This is absolutely ridiculous. It's abuse. I struggle with ethics committees almost every day, trying to get research-approved stuff. Look, it took me over 1 year to get permission from an ethics committee to ask mothers, student project, to ask mothers whether when they started solid foods. That's it. And we might upset the mothers. All right, okay, we might. But we want you back and forth, back and forth. I had to give my own personal mobile number, lest a mother wake up in the middle of the night so distressed by asking when she was going to have, when she started solid food. We're struggling with this all the time. How did these people in the children's hospitals of the Western world get permission to start blockers when published information is available to the contrary? I've no idea. So then there's the blockers. Okay, you can see a problem here. This kid's 9 years old or 10 years old, and he's blocked and everyone else is not blocked. So everyone's getting taller and everyone's developing secondary sex characteristics. And this kid thinks he's a girl. Well, now the movement is on, therefore, to give the cross-sex hormones at a younger age. But he already wants to be a girl, we'll make him into one. At the same time, everyone else, the girls are developing it. So it used to be that you were not supposed to give the cross-sex hormones until 16. This is international advice. But it is coming down and down and down. Does that mess with your head? Well, not according to all the court reports. There's no mention here. There are some mentions about, you're a bit more depressed, a bit more headaches and whatever, stuff like this. No mention in any of those court businesses of the information which is freely available. If you give a man estrogens, the grey matter shrinks at a rate 10 times faster than normal aging after only 6 months. The kids are on the blockers for years. The kids are on the cross-sex hormones for the rest of their life. If you want to evoke the secondary sex characteristics, you have to take the hormones until you get sick of it. So this goes on and on and on. There are all sorts of other things. There's hypertension, metabolic syndrome, a predisposition to clotting and so forth, all those sort of things they mention, but nobody mentions the effect on the brain. Well, what next? There have been 5 cases in Australia where the girl has, most of them have started blockers and many of them in the process of starting cross-sex hormones, that is to say testosterone, and they developed breasts. In recent years, 5 girls have had their breasts removed. 15, 16 and 17 years. 5 girls have been double mastectomy, despite the fact that international arguments are that you should not do irreversible surgery under the age of 18. Now, it's illegal in Australia to do anything more than that, but who would have thought it would be legal to remove breasts at that age? That's the way we are heading. So it leads them then to the issue of the sex reassignment surgery. And I can see this in reading the court cases. Oh yeah, he's going to have this, he's going to have the cross-sex hormones now, and as soon as possible, he's going to have sex reassignment surgery, which rolls off the tongue as if, oh yeah, he's going to have grommets put in his ears next week, or he's going to have his appendix out, a bit more serious, but it's nothing. The issue of the sex reassignment surgery is an enormous onslaught on the external characteristics of the child, attempting to create the ersatz features of the opposite child. It begins with castration, which has already been taking place on the cross-sex hormones. Nobody knows how long a male should take estrogens before the testes give up. And conversely, the other way, there is a beginning process of chemical castration, which in the sexual reassignment surgery is the first step. So if you're going to take a male, then you castrate, then you invert the scrotum, you create a hole, you invert the scrotum, and you create what you think is like a vagina. Then there's the issue of control of passing urine. Then there's the issue of if this person is going to practice receptive sex, how deep is this introitus you are making? And often not deep enough for receptive sex, so some bowel is actually appended to the inverted scrotum to deepen the issue. Is this going to work? Well, scrotum skin is made, it's squamous epithelium, and it is made to be outside. It's not made to be inside. If you put things inside and moisturize all the time, what happens? The skin breaks down, and there is infection. And then there is inflammation. And then there is fibrosis. And then there is the tendency for things to close. That's what we do. We have a hole, we close the hole. You see, this person is committed not just to medical hormones for the rest of their life. They are committed, therefore, to the surgical retouching of this experiment for the rest of their life. It's not that difficult to create a hole. It is very difficult to create a penis. That involves, of course, the closing of the introitus. It involves castration, and it involves swinging a graft, often from the forearm. I mean, there's a person on Australia came to Australia not so long ago, and basically saying, you know, I had the sex reassignment business, I was a female and now a male, and here's my scar to prove it. And I was just looking, oh, he's got a bit of a scar, fine. A scar is one thing. What you have to do is create a cylinder, and then you have to create an internal passage through which urine is going to come, and clearly incontinence is an issue. You have to append this. You have to change the surgery around, and this has to be an appendage which is created, which has its own blood supply and is not going to get gangrenous and so forth. And then, of course, if you want to practice penetrative sex, you have to stiffen this. Now, if there's any humor in this at all, you might well recall that Eve was made from a rib from Adam. Well, sometimes the rib is taken in order to make the penetrative organ in the woman. So a bone transplant is taken. Now, is that going to work? You can imagine the problem. The bone's going to protrude at some stage. You have to be removed, replaced. The whole thing has to be touched up. All this, it passes off in the court records and in the other things as if this is having grommets in your ears. This is an enormous intrusion into the body following an intrusion into the mind of the child. How many children have been involved in Australia? There are maybe about 65 children now who have gone through the courts to the first stage, which is receiving the cross-sex hormones. And it is likely that many of them would end up, not necessary, but likely that surgery would follow. In 5 of them, there has been mastectomies. All right, what can we do about it? I have been speaking to a number of people on the phone, and indeed corresponding with a woman in Ireland, funnily enough. And I was corresponding with 2 people in Victoria, and I have been saying, well, the good news is, wait, the statistics are the child is going to grow out of this through puberty. Don't put them in a position from which they can't retreat, psychologically or otherwise. Be nice to them, be kind to them. This is an identity issue, and many children have identity issues. This is not a big thing. But don't put them there in that position that they can't get back from. Because then it's all written up in a number of studies. When they get to the stage when, hang on a second, I'm not the girl after all. What's he going to think about his mother or everybody else? They're all part of this counterfeit. How can I come back from this? And then what happens? The medical pathway then continues. So the first thing then is to contain this, constrain it lovingly, in the full expectation that the statistics are on your side. If I was to do that in Victoria, I could have a health complaints bill under the Health Complaints Act, which came in February this year, a complaint lodged against me. And it would endanger my registration. But this is similar to the Ontario law and the American law. But in Victoria, they have exceeded themselves. I don't claim to be a Victorian. They have exceeded themselves. Because not only is this potentially illegal, but it doesn't just confine itself to me, it confines itself to anybody involved in the counselling process of that child. Who are they getting at? Christian pastors, counsellors, Sunday school teachers, anybody. Anybody who is involved that does not go along with their active transitioning is then possibly falling foul of this new law. It has to be tested, I agree, but it's there in black and white. Have the Victorians exceeded themselves anymore? Yes, indeed they have, because they have reversed the onus of proof. In a long and convoluted paragraph in Hansard that you need a PhD to be able to understand, Hennessy has asked this question: is this reversal of proof, does this contravene human rights acts? I can't possibly equate it, I couldn't make sense of it. But at the end of the business, she said, well, it is a reversal of the onus of truth, that's true, but under these circumstances, it is valid. Do you see what they have done? This is of enormous power in the state of Victoria. Is there more? Well, yes. In Canada, in the 1st of June, they passed a law which basically said that school teachers have a mandatory obligation to inform the Department of Child Services, or whatever they call it there and whatever you call it here. The school teachers have a mandatory responsibility to report to the docs if they suspect that a child has gender dysphoria and the parents are obstructing the process of transition. Surely we can't have a law like that in New South Wales, where I come from. Well, in fact, we almost do. Under instructions to the teachers, there is this mandatory issue of reporting child abuse, and failure of the parents to comply with this gender reorientation is equatable with child abuse, and they have a mandatory responsibility. Who's ever heard of these things? I never heard of these. I never heard of these laws. What is it due to? Where is it all coming from? I don't know. I thought this is a madness that has fallen upon us. I can't understand this. I have a better understanding after that first talk this morning, that maybe this is a spin-off from the pornography. That's a good thought. But where is it coming from? I think it has a spiritual basis, of course. We fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities of powers and the rulers of darkness and high places. You know that verse just as well as I do. This, I think, can be seen as yet another utopian exercise. This is an ideology. This is an ideology that there's no such things as boys and girls, that there is a transition, a rainbow transition, one to the other. It has a doctrine of sin. If we stand in the way of this, we are the sinners. It has a heaven to be gained, which is the creation of a flawless, more happy society. This is a utopian issue. Nothing convinced me more of that in reading these court cases by the certitude with which the doctors were saying, Willie will be cured.
Willie's depression will be relieved. Willie's confusion will be relieved if you go along with this medicalisation. A heaven to be gained, even a happiness. I've never heard of the doctor prognosticating happiness. Never. I never go along if I'm looking after someone who has got pneumonia. We don't go along and say, okay, he's going to be better tomorrow. He's going to be happy tomorrow. We say, look, he's really sick, and we're giving lots of antibiotics, and we really hope. That's not the certitude which has struck me reading these court cases, a certitude for the improvement and a hell to be gained. If you don't, what will happen? His confusion will be worse, his depression will be worse, he will commit suicide. And this is the big manipulating weapon. This child is going to commit suicide. Now, do they? There is no evidence to support that whatsoever. Indeed, there's no evidence to support any of this stuff. It is experimental hypothesis, whatever you want to call it. There is no evidence that these children will self-harm. Now, per se, if you cut back and look at autism, they have a higher rate of self-harm by themselves. Very, very severe depression, kid can't get out of bed, of course there's a likelihood. There are other issues and there are other ways of approaching that. There is no evidence that gender dysphoria by itself leads to suicide. This is a manipulating weapon. What happens when the sexual reassignment surgery is done? This is unarguable. The suicide rate in Belgium and Holland is something like 20 to 30 times higher in people who have had sex reassignment surgery. So how do you prevent the suicide? By kindly, peacefully, lovingly contain the confusion of the child, and whatever you do, don't let it get on the pathway of medicalisation. 8 minutes early then.
Dr. John, can I put the same question to you, and perhaps you could just tell us about your experience in Melbourne recently as part of your answer?
Okay, well, we were speaking in Melbourne at a church, and the 20 or 30 masked, hooded protesters turned up, linked arms around in a horseshoe fashion around the front of the church, and shouted obscenities and profanities at people who were trying to get in to the meeting. A number of them were, I assume, old enough to be their grandparents, so there certainly was no respect for age, but some of them were younger people, even with children. So this was ugly. We were protected inside, and it would have been nasty had they got in, by 20 or 30 police who were indeed armed, and they separated the two. The tensions rose to such an extent that the leader of the police decided that the Victorian police, brave, courageous, tough lot, may in fact be wounded themselves, and therefore they sent further people away. So probably 70 or 80 people were not able to get in. So I found that viscerally disturbing. I was not frightened. Indeed, I was half hoping that some of them would get in. I had a thought which I'd never thought of before, and that is that my father died in the fall of Singapore in the 8th Division. And I thought, he died for this? Where is freedom of association? Where is freedom of expression, freedom of meeting? Where is respect for older people? Where is respect for children? Where is my country going?
What was happening at the meeting that was so offensive?
Yeah, me.
Who was the group, or what was the protest about?
Well, Well, I was giving this similar talk that I was doing now in accompaniment with a lady who was speaking on the theory of gender dysphoria. It was run by the Australian Christian Lobby. It was just two speakers. It was in a church owned by a Christian Chinese doctor right in the middle of Melbourne at night. So when we were allowed to go, the police said you can't all just go out in one mass or there'd be mayhem. We had to walk out in small groups, and the police were lined up in the gutter, and we had to come between them and the building, and we walked down maybe, I don't know, I suppose 100 yards, and then we just diffused into the ordinary people in Swanston Street. So that's Melbourne for you, freedom of expression.
Dr. John, can I read an email to you that I received from a supporter, and their daughter goes to the same preschool as another girl. So they're both 4. And the friend's 4-year-old, I'll read what he says. From as early as 3 years old, she, the friend from the other family, has not wanted to wear girls' undies, has said she wants a penis, doesn't want to look at herself naked in the shower, stuff like that. When her folks let her have her hair cut short, she becomes happier and less conflicted. She still seems troubled at times, and her folks are taking her to psych help of some sort. Not sure what yet. They are being told that she is likely in the small percentile who are transgender, a boy trapped in a girl's body. They are also being told that children who are like this but forced into conforming with stereotypes have a high incidence of suicide as a result. Imagine being them now, wanting their daughter, 4-year-old, to be a happy wee girl, but scared to push because of the thought of having her suicide on their consciences if they do. I see their real love for their daughter and pain at this situation. It's hard to take one-off cases without knowing all the background, but how would you respond to one of our supporters who's trying to figure out how to talk to the family?
Well, I would emphasise the good news that the vast majority of children, in fact, reorientate to the natal sex through pregnancy. That is the wonderful international reassurance. And in the meantime, it is recognised that a number of children do have identity issues, and in the meantime, you contain that. You will lovingly contain it and constrain it in the full expectation that this child is likely to grow out of it. I would have a message of hope. Now, you can't get into all these little anecdotes like that without knowing lots of other things. As a 4-year-old girl, how does she know what a penis is? That would be one thing that would just come to my mind. I think you'd need to drill down a lot further before I could comment on this. Because in one of the court cases, I think it was a 4-year-old boy who came along to his parents, and allegedly they said that we know he was a girl because when he was 4, he came along and complained he didn't have a vagina. Now, how on earth does a 4-year-old boy know a thing like that? And then when he got to be 8 or so, he came along and demanded a womb transplant. Well, how does he know? I mean, maybe I was very naive, but I was more interested in cricket balls and funny things like that. The concept of having some sort of an internal operation was very far from my mind. So there are a lot of things, when you just hear a little thing like that, it is really a tragic story. There's pain in there. There's really serious pain in there. And there's really serious danger that the child is going to get on the pathway. So I can't really answer it except to say that the international statistics are vastly reassuring. Oh, and regarding the incidence of suicide, that's a weapon. I'm not going to use the sort of swear words that Zucker used. He was the guy running the thing in Toronto for all those years, until he got himself sacked. He basically said that this issue of suicide is a weapon of intimidation, a threat, and there is no evidence, according to him, no evidence whatsoever that these children are more likely per se to commit suicide. There is, on the other hand, if you want to prevent suicide, you prevent going down the medical pathway, because the rate in Belgium and these countries is 20 to 30 times higher in those people who have sex reassignment surgery. So if you want to prevent suicide, you make sure the child doesn't get on the medical escalator.
In the Youth 2000 study, though, it did talk about students. The students who identified that they were struggling with their gender, they were at a much higher rate to have considered suicide or suicide attempts. But they were also, what the media don't tend to report is that they also had very high at-risk behaviours, high drug taking, high risky sexual activity as well. But it is true that people, that they do have higher suicide rates, don't they? But the question is it because of the phobia in society, or is it inherent in...
I don't believe there's any evidence that gender dysphoria per se is rewarded with higher rates. Now, in association with it, everyone's survey, about 50%, have got associated serious mental comorbidities like depression, and everyone knows that that is likely to be associated with self-harm. Autism has a higher rate of self-harm than other things, and something like 15 to 20% in everybody's studies, these children are autistic. So there are a number of things, and I would argue that there is the mental issue, and that dysphoria is one symptom of an underlying disturbance. And if that child did self-harm, then you couldn't say it was just because of the gender dysphoria. And more illogically, you could not say, okay, we'll medicalise and treat the gender dysphoria, and therefore all the other things will get better.
Dr. John, what can I do as a concerned individual to speak against the gender dysphoria phenomenon that's rising?
I would say support organisations like yours. It's biblical that we should be watchmen on the top of the watchtowers, and to look around at things that are surrounding us, and not the least of which are the new laws that are likely to come up here in New Zealand. So I'm very proud to be associated with you for the work. I'm inspired by the work that you are doing, same as ACL. This is terrific. What you are doing is watchman type work, and therefore I would support the organisation. I would look at the laws that are coming, and I would try and get the message out that blockers are not safe and completely reversible and so forth. So it is through, if you hadn't invited me, I would probably just be sitting at home enjoying myself.
Recovering from Bangladesh. But the fact of the matter is, it is a juggernaut. It is a huge social change that's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think there's an Achilles heel here, because someone said earlier on, and it's true, doctors are terrified of being sued. And in the last paragraph of my last article, I said that there are many vulnerabilities here, not the least of which is the medical profession, who are getting in there and using the blockers and then the cross-sex hormones and stuff. It's just a matter of time before someone comes and said, hey, listen, you messed with my brain. It's thinner than it would have otherwise been. I am now taking you to court. And I'll tell you something. I was talking with someone on the phone from somewhere in Australia just recently, and he said, what can I do? And I said, I didn't know what he was going to do. And I thought, I'd tell you what, why don't you write to those doctors with a letter to the hospital and say, you have heard that these blockers damage your child's brain, and the cross-sex things shrink the brain, and download, if you wish, all the references in my article, and say, this is my argument, and you are going to do this to my child, and if my child suffers from any brain damage, I'm coming looking for you. I think that's their Achilles heel.
Can I ask you another question, because I'm scared to ask Melinda anymore? I'd actually like to change the topic, because we've covered off the marijuana issue, and a big push this week in the media, and a symposium, and there's a bill before Parliament, medicinal marijuana. Now, you know, we were talking about it. You went to Colorado, you visited, you've researched, you went to the conferences. Tell us, should we decriminalise marijuana?
No, I don't believe you should. because this push is coming out at the very time some very clever, finite research is being released on the actual shrinkage, the effect, especially on the adolescent brain, with MRI, functional studies and so forth. This is new work, and it's confirming what we already suspected, that it does damage. That's the very first thing. The second, well, decriminalising, I thought you were going to talk about medical marijuana.
We'll do both, keep going.
Well, the issue of medical marijuana, and that's the thin edge of the wedge to this, is the emotional business. Because we in Australia have had a similar case to the one in America, where a child with one of these terrible inborn errors of brain function predisposing to refractory convulsions, and the parents came out and said the only thing which has worked is marijuana. There is no proof, it's not backed up at all in this, and indeed in the Australian one, the doctor had not at that stage used the most recent effective anticonvulsant that came out. So there's a lot of stuff going on we don't know about. However, my wife and I, we went, no, she didn't, she came another one. We went to this conference in pro-medical marijuana conference, where the good news is it cures everything from baldness to having too much hair. It's just a matter of what you particularly want. And it was like a pimple on the edge of a big pumpkin, and then what was the pumpkin was the investors conference. In America, they have these sort of exhibition centres. You could park half a dozen jumbo jets in them and all that sort of thing. This was the issue. I went in there and I was astonished. I'd never seen a marijuana plant growing before. Here they were by their hundreds, because what they were demonstrating was the industrial production of it, the agricultural production, and how you could create like acres of glass houses, and you could change the intensity of the light depending on the stage of the bud. You could control the nutrient that was flowing through. You could control the temperature. All these things. It's a very sensitive plant. So what they were doing was showing you how you could produce this in industrial fashion. Why? Because there were millions to be made, and including in Australia. There were two people there talking about the opportunities that were going to open for this sort of production as soon as it became legalised in Australia. And how is it, they didn't say this, but the way it is going to be legalised is through this spurious claims that medical marijuana is of use in all these kind of symptoms. They are spurious claims because they are not validated by a scientific research, full stop.
But there are, well, anecdotal examples of parents who say, marijuana changed my child's life from convulsing 100 times a day down to 2 or 3.
Yeah, okay. So I went and spoke with one of the people who are running an epilepsy clinic in one of the children's hospitals over there, and said, look, you have published this. And he said, well, hang on. What you should know, the parents that have come to us have already elected to try marijuana because it's free in that state. And they are saying that there is a significant reduction in the number of convulsions that the children have. Now, mind you, the marijuana industry itself says that there is at least a 70% psychological effect. What's the right word? I'm trying to... exactly. It is a 70% placebo, that's what they said. And he said, I said, well, you know, what do you think? And he said, well, we don't know, because none of these trials are controlled. They're already children who've having convulsions. Their parents are electing to do it, but we don't know because we are not investigating it. So how do you know that the child is not having a convulsion? A convulsion is diagnosed by abnormal electrical activity if you have the child wired up on an EEG, or if he's having a different manifestation on the face. The only way you can tell that is by having constant video conferencing, or video sort of taping, in association with the electrical activity. The fact that you might just give a sedative may well not stop the electrical impulses, but merely their manifestation. It's as simple as that. And none of these studies had had that kind of control. Moreover, he said that we were now analysing the drug levels of the children who we are treating, and in one of the drugs, clobazepam, what we found was when you are using marijuana extracts, the levels of that drug were in fact higher. In other words, the marijuana was competing for the excretion of that drug. So it may well just have been that the blood level was in fact higher. Basically, he said he didn't know. And I've been corresponding because I took that seriously. If you really want to know, I had another 2 articles in Quadrant along this line entering into the debate. The big trial, which is a cross-study blinded trial, is being done by people in New York, and that is on a purified derivative of marijuana, the cannabidiol, which is more sedative. There are 400 components in the weed, and one of them, cannabidiol, a major component, is more sedative than the euphoric THC. They had extracted, purified, quantified, and were giving this to their children with epilepsy, and there appeared that it might make a difference when added to all the others, but the answer was not in. Otherwise, it's not known.